Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Siju. Coming up in this edition, Russian and Ukrainian delegations have met in Istanbul in the first direct talks between the two countries since March 2022. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifang says China is willing to work with France to protect an open and cooperative international economic and trade environment. And Hamas has set out conditions for releasing the remaining hostages, while Israel reports no progress in the ceasefire talks in Doha. We begin with the Russia-Ukraine peace talks. Russia and Ukraine have had their first direct talks since March 2022 as delegations met in Istanbul. It comes after a three-way meeting among Ukraine, the United States and Turkiye. The negotiators included foreign affairs chiefs from all three countries and other senior officials. Russian President Vladimir Putin proposed the first direct talks between Moscow and Kyiv since March 2022, but decided not to attend. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of not taking the meeting seriously. Zelensky said a ceasefire is the top priority. The Ukrainian leader met his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara and said he would send a delegation to Istanbul led by his defense minister. Presidential aide Vladimir Medinsky is heading the Russian delegation. He has met Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. Medinsky said his team has a constructive mindset. Mihail Badovit reports from Istanbul.
Russian and Ukrainian delegations failed to come together on Thursday in Istanbul for much-anticipated direct talks between the two countries, the first of its kind since March 2022. Late on Wednesday evening, Russian President Vladimir Putin had announced he wouldn't be attending the Istanbul talks and instead sent a lower-level delegation. The Russian delegation included presidential advisor Vladimir Medinsky, a senior diplomat, and defense officials. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to Ankara to meet with the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Prior to their meeting, Zelensky called the Russian delegation decorative. But after talks with Erdogan, Zelensky announced that he would send a Ukrainian delegation to Istanbul, led by Ukraine's defense minister, with a mandate to discuss a ceasefire. In Istanbul, the head of the Russian delegation, Vladimir Medinsky, said they were prepared to resume negotiations with Ukraine and would discuss possible compromises with Kyiv. U.S. officials were also present in Turkiye. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, stressed that a breakthrough on Ukraine would only happen when President Trump interacts directly with his Russian counterpart, Putin. EU leaders have also mounted pressure and said new sanctions will be imposed if there's no progress in ceasefire talks this week.
That was Mihail Badovit in Istanbul. In Europe, Chinese Vice Premier He Lifang says China is willing to work with France to protect an open and cooperative international economic and trade environment. He co-chaired a high-level economic and financial dialogue between the two countries in Paris. The Vice Premier pledged to create a favorable investment environment that would invigorate the comprehensive strategic partnership and advance China-Europe cooperation. French Finance Minister Eric Lombard expressed France's willingness to address global challenges and uphold multilateralism and free trade. Jan Kopstake reports from Paris.
China and France reaffirmed their commitment to deepen economic ties and bilateral cooperation at this 10th high-level economic and financial dialogue in Paris. The talks were co-chaired by Chinese Vice Premier He Lifang and French Finance Minister Eric Lombard, underlining the two countries' shared ambition to strengthen the China-France comprehensive strategic partnership. Vice Premier He highlighted last year's state visit to France by President Xi Jinping, which marked the 60th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two countries. President Xi and French President Emmanuel Macron had reached consensus on a series of important areas of cooperation. The Vice Premier said China is willing to work with France to implement the decisions reached during that visit and enrich areas of mutually beneficial cooperation by creating a favorable trade and investment environment for both countries.
We support the expansion of trade and investment in both directions. We are committed to providing fair, non-discriminatory, and transparent conditions for competition in areas such as agriculture, agri-food, medicine, finance, 5G, energy, and the digital economy.
Ce type d'exercice vient souligner This type of event underlines the strength of the economic ties between our two countries. Maintaining this dialogue between our countries is more important than ever today, in a world that is marked by greater uncertainty and rising tensions.
During the visit, Vice Premier He met high-level representatives from the cosmetics and medical field, as well as the CEO of Airbus. Vice Premier He was also shown around a family-run farm in Normandy, underlining the growing possibilities of agricultural cooperation. New agreements on poultry and breeder eggs were signed as part of a push to boost agricultural trade between France and China. The event closed with a symposium for French and Chinese entrepreneurs. During the meeting, both sides also emphasized the importance of bringing high-quality products to Chinese and French consumers, while also attracting business to invest in each country, further developing future economic development.
That was a report on the Chinese Vice Premier's visit to France. In Asia, Chinese Vice Commerce Minister Li Chenggang says negotiations over China's accession to the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, or DEPA, have made progress. He attended a ministerial meeting with the DEPA members during the Asia-Pacific Economic Partnership meeting in South Korea. The Vice Minister pledged that China will continue to promote high-level opening up and protect the rule-based international economic and trade order. He added that China's membership in DEPA will create more market opportunities. U.S. tariffs dominated discussions at the APEC meeting. Xinhan reports from Jeju Island on key agenda items.
Well, working-level negotiations running late into the night on Thursday and into Friday here on Jeju Island here in South Korea. South Korea, of course, is this year's APEC chair, and that's why these preparatory meetings are taking place here in the country. It also happens to be the first multilateral sort of gathering of trade officials since the U.S. Trump administration announced its sweeping tariffs. We also know, but not just including the main event, but there's a lot of negotiation happening on the sidelines of these talks. Just at the beginning of these meetings, APEC releasing an annual report, an analysis report saying that the Trump tariffs would really downgrade the region's exports. If you consider half of the world's exports occur in this region, APEC is now projecting global exports to be about 0.4% this year. That compared to more than 5% last year. And also in terms of economic growth, there's going to be a downgrade of 3.3 down to 2.4%. So that's sort of the impact that APEC is sort of analyzing with these Trump tariffs. What's also happening is there's a lot of negotiations happening on the sidelines, and especially with the presence of U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer here in Jeju Island. There have been a slew of talks on the sidelines with nations trying to get some leverage in their talks, including South Korea.
That was Xinhan in South Korea. Turning to the Middle East, a senior Hamas official says the group is willing to release all remaining hostages in Gaza if its conditions are met. Bassem Naim called for an end to the fighting and for humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. Naim also spoke about the U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts in the region, saying he believes Trump is willing and capable of bringing peace. Meanwhile, Israel claims that there has been no progress in the ceasefire talks in Doha. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
We are hearing reports now saying that the negotiations in Doha have practically ended. No progress according to what we're hearing. We know that there's plenty of pressure coming from the American side. Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, was the one in charge of being in touch with the Israelis. And as opposed to what Netanyahu does, which is trying to drag time, send a delegation and then wait for them to come back and more consultations, Steve Witkoff tried the direct approach, having several phone calls with the Prime Minister when he was in Qatar, and Witkoff was also here in Israel earlier this week meeting the Prime Minister. But again, according to what we're hearing, no progress has been made. If this is correct, then Israel will probably be now preparing for the expansion of the military campaign. The Israeli sources have said all along that this is something that will happen without any progress once the American president leaves the area.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. In North America, American companies responsible for transporting goods to Walmart and other retailers are expecting big job losses due to recent tariff increases. Edis Tianshan spoke with some workers at two of the busiest ports in the world.
The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, the busiest port complex in the Western Hemisphere, together they handle nearly a third of all container shipments to the United States, and they're among the biggest employers in the region.
Well, we come up here and we go to the various union halls for our job calls and get assigned to our positions on various ships. And what everyone's talking about right now is how the tariffs could affect us and our jobs.
The disruption caused by U.S. tariffs is becoming clearer, especially with the decline in the number of container ships coming from China.
So again, it's going to be interesting to see what the unintended consequences may be, which is loss of jobs. And of course, when you lose jobs, unemployment goes up, there's less consumer spending, and 2/3 of our GDP is based on consumer spending. So if you look at that formula, we have concerns about the future.
The CEO of the Port of LA says every 4 containers means a job, and he predicts a sharp decline in dock work for employees. Many workers like Robert Spakowski are already bracing for impact.
And there'll be only so many jobs to go around and a lot of guys looking for work. So it was spelled out by some of the dispatchers at the unions that this is a concern, this is probably going to be happening and it's going to affect us all. So, it's our livelihood. We're concerned about it. And there's thousands of workers down here that are watching the news every day, seeing what's going to happen.
It's still hard to predict the exact toll and the timeline for the impact caused by these tariffs. But here in Los Angeles and Long Beach, the busiest ports in the nation, which moved 20 million containers last year, are already showing a 44% drop in docked vessels in the week of May 4 compared to last year. And shipping experts predict that number could go higher if the current tariffs remain in place.
That was Edis Tianshan reporting. Finally, in Africa, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Nigeria says more than 130 people have died from the Lassa fever so far this year. The country has confirmed more than 710 cases. The outbreak has spread to 18 states, with 3 accounting for most of the deaths. Deji Badimosi has more from Lagos.
It's a very worrying development as cases of Lassa fever continues to spread across the country. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control and Prevention, NCDC, says the disease has now spread to 18 states in the country with over 700 confirmed cases. It puts the case fatality rate at 19.2%, which is higher than the case fatality rate of the same period last year. Now, the worst affected states are Taraba and Bauchi in the northeast of the country and Ondo State in the southwest. Taraba, by the way, where the disease was first discovered in Nigeria, has recorded the highest number of deaths so far this period, 34 in total. And the predominant age group affected by the disease is between 21 and 30, according to health authorities. Now, the NCDC says it's fully activated the National Lassa Fever Multi-Partner Multi-Sectoral Incident Management System to coordinate the response activities at all levels. It says everything is being done to check the spread of the disease. Now, Lassa fever is endemic to Nigeria and is quite common during the dry season. Experts say the rodents that spread the disease tend to live longer in warmer temperatures and that transmission reached their peak during this period. The NCDC has actually been sending out advisories asking people to keep their environment clean and do all they can to put rodents away.
That was Deji Badimosi reporting. Now, recapping the headlines before we go. Russian and Ukrainian delegations have met in Istanbul in the first direct talks between the two countries since March 2022. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng has said China is willing to work with France to protect an open and cooperative international economic and trade environment. And Hamas has demanded a ceasefire and the delivery of humanitarian aid as conditions for releasing the remaining hostages in Gaza, while Israel says there is no progress in ceasefire talks. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, the podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.